Hi, I'm Peter Harrington, and you're listening to Policy in Pandemics, a podcast from OPM giving you a unique look into the COVID-19 crisis around the world. Welcome to our first episode of Policy in Pandemics. Our goal with this podcast is to give people a unique perspective into how governments around the world are tackling the COVID-19 crisis and the tough policy questions that come with it. We're really excited for our first guest to have Etjen Xhafaj, who is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Albania. Etjen, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much for the interview, Peter.
Etjen, to get us started, could you describe the current situation in Albania for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now in Albania, we have around 420 cases of people who are sick with COVID-19. We have 22 unfortunate victims over the past 4 weeks. We've had the disease and social distancing in Albania for the past 4+ weeks. So it started on March 10th and 11th that the government moved very proactively with measures to ensure that people were locked in. Since most of our cases had come from abroad, so mostly from Italy and people who had traveled to Italy, this went phase by phase, but the situation in the Balkans evolved very quickly. Right now, it seems that we are somewhat managing. I wouldn't want to jinx the process because, of course, this is being a disease that you only find out a few weeks or days afterwards, whether people are asymptomatic and are giving off the disease or the virus, or whether they are showing symptoms of the disease. It's something that is complicating all of the, let's say, calculations of any government, not just the Albanian government, because you are having to act, let's say, in hindsight. So in a way, you are trying to estimate the situation as it were a week, 10 days, 2 weeks before the present. Right now, though, we have around 65 people who are in intensive care units. Only 9 of those are actually presently linked to ventilators, thankfully. We have had, as I said, 22 victims. Some of them have been younger than the average of countries in the region. But we are containing the disease in that over the past 3 days, we had 16, and then today, 9 new cases. And each day we had over 10 people who are recovering from the disease. So each day we have more people getting back to health or coming out negative on their second test. Then we have people that are sick. Of course, at the same time, the number of tests over the past 3 days has been 236, and today 178 tests. So in a way, the number of people is decreasing. So we have 420 cases, of which 9 new cases today. And so basically in terms of the flattening of the curve, we are managing to somehow bring it down exponentially, considering the beginning and the first few days. But of course, this is an unpredictable disease and it's an unpredictable virus. And especially, as I said earlier, this 2-week period is something that complicates calculations for the government really, really much.
I'm interested in the early stages of the crisis and how that played out inside government. So, like the rest of the world, in early March, you're watching the COVID-19 crisis explode across Western Europe and the scale of it was starting to become clear. Can you tell us about what was going on at the senior levels of government in those initial days? What were the big priorities? What were some of the big decisions made early on?
The situation with COVID evolved very quickly in Albania. On the 3rd week of February, we had a national security council meeting that the Prime Minister called, where I myself reported on behalf of the Minister of Foreign Affairs on the situation with our embassies. And even earlier than that, we had reported on the issue of our embassies in China and other countries that were directly touched by COVID, especially as we moved away diplomatic staff, as this became a very, very pressing issue, especially for the health of diplomats. And so we would report, and also the Ministry of Health would report on all the measures. Thankfully, we had some time to evaluate what we could do and what was working for countries. So in terms of adding capacity to the health system, that was one of the, let's say, immediate issues that we tried to tackle from the beginning, especially as in countries like Albania, the availability of ventilators and adequate supply of medical equipment is not as large as it is in countries like the UK or the US, which are now experiencing a huge issue with this. And this is why the Prime Minister and the working group that was working on this specifically moved very aggressively from the beginning to try and address the situation by managing the flow of people and interaction between people to ensure that the virus will not be by and large in society, but where the numbers would be limited. What do I mean by that? We had a government meeting on Monday where all the government was present. We had a government meeting on Wednesday where no deputy ministers, we usually have deputy ministers in all government meetings. By Wednesday, we were not there. And by Thursday, government meetings were not physical anymore. It was that quickly that the situation changed and altered in Albania. By Monday, we were thinking of closing schools and they were closed on Tuesday. And then by Thursday, we already had online classes because everybody realized that there was only one way of controlling this, and it was not through the healthcare system. It was by ensuring that people stayed at home and that the virus did not go and get spread into society.
You describe how, like many countries, Albania has put in place lockdown measures to contain the spread of the virus. Could you tell us a bit about what measures or steps the government has taken to ensure people comply with the lockdown, to ensure people are able to comply with the lockdown?
The government used to have a platform that is called shqipëriaqeduam.al, or the Albania that we want.al, which was a platform where people could express their concerns regarding specific issues with government institutions. And all of the platform right now has been turned into servicing people who are locked in or people who are quarantined because of the disease. Having dealt with problems regarding bureaucratic timing, issues that have to do with the non-response from institutions, and also corruption. Over the past 2.5 years, Albania has built up this platform. You have in every ministry and public institutions people who reply very promptly to these messages that are sent directly by citizens voicing their own discord or their issues with the public institutions. And of course, the answer has to be within a given timeline. The platform is aimed at mainly ensuring that people who cannot or who are at high risk should not get out. So we have a lot of the elderly who write to the platform asking for supplies and asking for help. And this is why, parallel to the platform, we also had a volunteering platform where people can, we call it, adopt a grandfather or a grandmother and help those people with shopping, getting basic mailing to them, ensuring that they would get all of the services that they absolutely need. Right from March, the beginning of the second week of March, so the 11th or the 12th, if I'm not mistaken, the government started mailing pensions to people who were locked in to ensure that they would not get out and that they would receive all of the services that they would need at home. And of course, then we changed the national emergency number, which is 127 in Albania, to specifically cater to people who either have COVID concerns or COVID-related concerns. And so the the national emergency number basically works as a call your doctor number for emergencies, but also to ensure that people who need the healthcare are not transported by themselves to the health facilities, but that they're taken there by ambulance. The Prime Minister has been on top of that, meaning that almost on a nightly basis, he goes out himself and makes about 30 to 40 phone calls of numbers and people who have called have written to the national platform to see what their big concerns are, how they can be helped. So also to enforce to strengthen the platform, and of course the responding capability of the government.
When it came to your response strategy, where was the advice coming from? Was it coming from observing other countries, or was it coming from scientific advisors in Albania?
It was both. Let's keep in mind that this was the second week of March. By the second week of March, the healthcare system of Italy, our close neighbor, and the country where we have most of our economic exchanges with, because it's the gate of the EU for us. So over 1/4 of the Albanian exports go through Italy. By that time, their health system was becoming overwhelmed. And of course, you saw regions like Lombardy and other regions in Italy where they were being completely overrun with it. And of course, at the same time, they had this issue where they kept internal transportation open for 2 days, and basically that's how the virus spread to the other regions in Italy. So on one hand, we had a lot of good advice from our internal system of epidemiologists and all of these crisis units in Albania, but also learning from the example of Italy. It became pretty clear to us that one of the big issues was not how acute the symptoms of the disease and the virus were, but it was how quickly the people would get into the health system and overwhelm the existing capacities. And of course, at the same time, we realized that our health system capacities were nowhere compared to Italy, which is a G7 country, whereas Albania is a small country in the Balkans. So we needed to move ahead of the curve. Even before this flattening the curve was a term, we were trying to limit the number of people infected. So we at the time were discussing a number of options to control the contacts that the people infected with the disease had, in trying to limit those contacts. And this is why the decision was taken. Our very first case, so case 0 in Albania, was a gentleman who came back from Italy, gave the disease to his father, which was case 1, and had been moving around for a couple of days. So we quarantined his family completely, and we moved to quarantine everybody who had traveled over the past 2 weeks to countries that were considered high-risk countries. This was still at a time when there were 40 to 50 countries in the world, not like right now when almost every country has it, where they had infections. So that was done to move directly to the source and not allow everybody to be filtered into the health system so as to overwhelm the health system. So the issue in the first few days was specifically this. And a very close second one, of course, was the economic impact of the crisis. Most of the exports of Albania go to European countries, but they're labor intensive. Because of that, one of the immediate issues on March 13th and 14th became controlling the environment within factories and ensuring that the factories would not become a breeding ground for the virus. And that is something that we are still trying to deal with and to cope with, as we are thinking of gradually and very slowly opening up the economy, because it's something that we absolutely need to do. Closing down or locking down Albania to ensure social distancing has a very large economic impact on the budget. So, of course, this is one of the issues that we are discussing now. We have had a package for the economy, but we are now probably going to move into a second one to help people who have been laid off because of the decreased orders and capacity, and also to ensure that businesses stay afloat.
Etjen, you brought up the economy there a couple of times. What has been the immediate effect of this crisis and of the responses to it on the Albanian economy?
Well, one of the immediate effects has been that some of the most vibrant sectors of the Albanian economy, so the driving engines of economic growth, have completely stalled. I mean, tourism is the biggest economic sector in the world. And in Albania, it has been a sector over the past 5 years that has always grown at double digits. Right now, we saw a complete cancellation of all reservations for the next few months. And of course, the transportation industry that has completely stalled also severely hampered the ability to move. So that has been one of the immediate impacts. Thankfully, agriculture has been going because of its typology. So because of people working in fields, not being in contact, in close contacts with many other people, it has had a lot of positive, let's say, development, and it has been a very good year for agricultural product in Albania. But the problem with that specific sector is the closure of borders, because most countries now are quarantining even drivers of trucks. So we are, my ministry and the emergency unit that is headed by my colleague Gentar is currently working very, very actively in trying to ensure that the borders are open to trucks and the trade can continue. And of course, there is some support from the European Union also. But in terms of economic activity, what we have seen, like in most other countries in the world, is we have seen a stalling. All the service sector seems to be blocked. Of course, you have still services that are catering and delivering that are still working, but they are at a fraction of their capacity or at the fraction of their activity previous to the lockdown and to the crisis. So that is one of the immediate things that we saw. And then, of course, as the time and the days moved forward, the impact of that came to be felt on fiscal income, like in all other countries. But different to most other countries, especially countries that are part of the G7, Albania and countries in the Western Balkans are very reliant on current income for their operations, meaning the capacity to increase debt is quite limited. The reserves on the other side are quite limited. And of course, since over 99% of the businesses are small and medium enterprises that are much smaller than SMEs in developed countries, so we mean here enterprises where there are family businesses down at the bottom. So basically, one or two people are employed. And because of the decreased capacity or even the lockdown, they had no activity. So it moved very quickly from being an economy issue or an economic issue for the economy at large to an economic issue for families. And so the government moved in 2 weeks ago with a very aggressive package where the government is paying social security contributions for a number of employees. We are covering income for many families where people have either been laid off, or where they've had issues in terms of making their family business work. And right now we are working on a second package to work for companies where we will be helping more companies. And of course, most of these applications went through the fiscal system, so our tax system, and of course, a lot of them are online. And so far, from the first week of April, we have over 13,000 demands, requests from people for their salaries that have been answered positively, and a number of other ones that are being addressed by the government, because businesses are also in a very, very tight spot right now. It has been 4 weeks of lockdown, so for a lot of them, and especially for the exporting system, a lot of the orders and a lot of the deliveries are not guaranteed anymore from the other side. So of course, the Albanian government has also moved with €100 million package on guaranteeing loans for businesses, and the entire package is around $450 million for the economy at large. And right now we are working on another on another package of relief that will probably be launched sometime next week.
You mentioned the EU a few moments ago, and also you've spoken about the enormous impact that this crisis is having on Albania's fiscal situation. We're seeing huge stimulus packages in OECD countries, but for a country with very limited ability to borrow like Albania, what are your options and how important is international support to get through this?
Well, to an extent, it's ironic. On March 26th, we actually received a very welcome news that we had been waiting for the past 2 decades. So Albania is now with North Macedonia. We are officially going to open negotiations with the EU to become full-fledged members. And unfortunately, this came at a very, very troublesome time, because otherwise this would have been an incredible news, and a news that would have, of course, been a source of a lot of positive emotion in a country like Albania, where over 92% of the population is pro-EU. And I think we are the most pro-EU country, certainly in Europe, probably anywhere. So the EU, they did a limited package in the beginning, but of course, the Austrian Chancellor and the enlargement commissioner, so Chancellor Kurz and Commissioner Varhelyi, had a conference call with all the leaders of the Western Balkans, where they discussed to have a tool to assist either both directly and in time Western Balkan countries, all 6 Western Balkan countries. So that means Albania, Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia and Montenegro, and Northern Macedonia, in handling the COVID crisis. The package was 450 million euros, of which Albania, I think, received 4 million immediate assistance to the healthcare system and 45 million in loans. Long term. We are still discussing with the European Commission on more tools, because of course this is something, but this is a lot more is needed, because it is a very tough time, and for countries that are small, that have limited capacity, like you said. For us, one of the things that helps is that a lot of countries and a lot of international financial institutions offered a credit line to Albania due to the earthquake of November 26th. So of course we are trying to hedge and to manage the usage of all of these credit lines, to ensure that on one hand liquidity is not an issue, and at the other hand that of course the economy is not flunking. Of course, right now, one of the big issues that remains to be seen is what package the European Union will use for itself, because a lot of this, of course, you know this very well, a lot of the reserve currencies, the countries are having a big impact and a big issue right now. And of course, a lot of the necessities are becoming ever more expensive. So all of these suits for primary healthcare workers, the masks, the ventilators, the medicines, everything is becoming more and more expensive. So the solution will need to be a much wider than anybody thought. Yeah. Of course, as a region, we are now working into this direction. We are constantly communicating with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to find out what can be done. And of course, this is not something limited to a country, a region, or even a continent. This will need to be a global solution for this, especially on the financial side. Yeah. And so as we are trying to work through our current impasse, so trying to get over the current hurdles and obstacles, meaning buying more masks, buying more ventilators, bringing in more medications from countries where they have shown to be very effective in fighting COVID. At the same time, we are closely monitoring the situation with the EU, with the US, and all these international multilateral bodies to see what the solutions will be, and then to try and work out how we will fit in.
I think you're absolutely right that this crisis is going to need quite creative thinking at the international level around support for developing countries. What do you see as the immediate economic outlook for Albania? What are the big challenges in the next few months? And what forward planning is going on in government at the moment around opening things up and kickstarting activity again?
We saw from the Economist's intelligence unit report 2 days ago, and also from the Bloomberg predictions of the past week, of course, economic growth in all of the world will be severely hampered by this. I saw a report on CNN only today that said that, especially for the European Union, this will be something that will have a very, very wide impact. And of course, then in 2021, there will be some rebound, but there will be a net loss of economic productivity in all of Europe, but probably in most of the world. So for us, one of the big issues is ensuring that, on one hand, we do have the stability of the currency, because of course that is one of the first tools that most countries are thinking about. But thankfully, the Albanian lek has been very stable over the past 4 or 5 years. The second thing is ensuring that we have enough exports to maintain the strength of our currency. And right now, that means ensuring that our exports are getting to the markets, and especially most of the agricultural exports, because that is, we are in season right now for a lot of agricultural produce that needs to go to the market. But looking at it from a longer term perspective, this means that we need to get back to producing, we need to get back to working. So we need to get our labor force back to work. Of course, that doesn't just belong on us. I mean, that doesn't just depend on us and our ability to cope with the disease and the present situation. It also depends on demand in a lot of countries. So right now we are looking at the bigger scheme of things as a world, as a globe. So we are looking at avoiding this becoming a supply side crisis. So ensuring that a few months from now, regardless of how the virus will continue, regardless of how the medical tools to contradict the virus will go, that there will be enough supplies to ensure that global order will be there. But at the same time, we have an immediate, and that is just right here, demand side issue. So for a lot of our production, for a lot of manufacturing production, for a lot of the tourism industry, for a lot of the industries that produce consumer goods from Albania and export them, of course, there is a very, 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 very limited market, because people are not buying anything but the essentials. So on one hand, the focus is on exporting and ensuring that these essentials, or the ones that we produce, get to markets. The second one is ensuring that the industries that produce the non-essentials continue to live beyond this threshold of the crisis over the next 2 months. The plan for Albania, or the discussion for the plan for Albania, because of course the plan cannot be clearly delineated. We were thinking of having a soft opening last week to gradually allow people, especially people who work in producing or in services that are export oriented, call centers, manufacturing, and the like, to get back to work for limited amount of time every day, for a greater amount of time every day, rather than the 8 to 1 p.m.
So it's a gradual easing of those measures to try and bring some economic activity back into the...
Yes, precisely. So to ease the situation and to ensure that some of the people that need to be there working for the companies and enterprises to function would go and work. And then, in true Balkan style, we had a couple of issues around the country mostly related to funerals and things like that, where we had very quick distribution or very quick infection of people related to things that are very specifically cultural, because you're in the Balkans, everybody has to go, everybody has to pay their last respects. And then we had in Shkodra 12 people sick from the same family from just going to the funeral. So it's something that changed overnight on Friday, when we were trying to plan on to have a soft opening or liberalization of movement for specific sectors on Sunday. So the idea is to slowly ensuring the health and safety of all workers, to open some of the sectors and to ensure that they move, and then to add some services on top of it as we see that we are monitoring the situation.
Etjen, we've been absolutely delighted to have you as our first guest on Policy in Pandemics. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure, Peter.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Policy in Pandemics. A big thank you to our producer, Catherine Valentine, and our editor, Emmy Fairbairn. You can get all our podcasts, as well as blogs, papers, and much more at opml.co.uk, and find us on Twitter at OPM Global. Until next time, stay safe.